All right, so let's dive right into it. First, starting off with our big questions that we will be putting forth over our discussion. Are these New Year attacks acts of terror? Authorities right now haven't confirmed the same. They are looking into that aspect. Are the New Orleans and Las Vegas attacks miles apart, miles away, hours apart? Are they linked? Are the attacks an attempt to send a message to Donald Trump and to Elon Musk, as Musk has indicated? Are the attacks also timed to Trump's inauguration, which is less than 20 days from now? Let's open this up. Joining us on the news today tonight is Andrew Latham, Professor of International Relations, joining us from St. Paul in the United States. We also have Sajid Tarar, Republican leader, who is joining us from Maryland in America. Victor Asal, Professor, University of Albany, is also with us. We have Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow of the Observer Research Foundation, Tara Karta, Terrorism and Security Expert. Thank you all very much for joining us tonight. I'd like to begin first with Professor Latham. What we've seen is a very, very unfortunate start, Professor, to 2025 in America. What are your thoughts about what's really happened about these three attacks? Would you deem them as acts of terror, particularly the two, one that's been reported in New Orleans and the other in Vegas?
Well, clearly they're acts of terror in that they're motivated by politics and there was mass murders committed. Whether there was conspiracy, I'm not convinced of that. I think this is a manifestation of a worldview that has taken hold in certain parts of the United States, and it's manifesting itself as these mass murders. So no conspiracy. I don't buy that. Mm-hmm. But these things are happening for a reason. And it has to be said, too, just quickly, that the people, as far as we know, that were perpetrating these crimes were very troubled individuals. And so the way in which they expressed their rage and anger for their failing lives was given a political frame, and that enabled them to act in a very particular way. And it was ever thus. That's always been the case with terrorists. The actual perpetrators of terrorism are often very troubled individuals, not simply political activists acting on their political convictions.
Sajid Tarar, do you think so too? Do you agree with Professor Latham that they could be, in fact, driven by some sort of political motive? Mr. Tarar, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. You know, here, I'm not only Republican, but I'm a Muslim at the same time in the US, and I wanted to tell you what is going on. Unfortunately, I have to blame the last administration, Biden, Kamala Harris administration, when in New York and continuously every part of the country where the kids are burning American flags and they are asking for international intifada. So why they were not giving an answer, why there was no action taken there. So right now, matter of fact, this has increased the mandate of Donald Trump. And this is sending the signal how fragile the word peace is. So I definitely link, because not only a link, the gentleman who did it in New Orleans, there was an ISIS flag hanging on his pickup truck at the same time. But I condemn, and this is not the solution. This is not the way moving forward. But again, the hatred and against America, against their own country, this was promoted during last 4 years, which is not fair with the America. But Donald Trump, his uphill battle, I'm not sure how he would be able to do it within 2 years or within 4 years, because defunding police, defunding this, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, January 6th. I mean, all of this, that the society, America is, and plus at the same time, 11 million illegals, more than 35,000 Chinese, they have come into the US. So America, it's a national security matter.
No, but do you believe it's a conspiracy? Do you believe it's timed to the Trump inauguration, that we're less than 20 days from it?
First of all, New Orleans incident has been declared as a terrorist. In Las Vegas, event has not been marked yet. There's still investigation, and New York is still under investigation. But definitely, we can say that this is a signal towards Donald Trump, because that's one of the biggest events the world is looking forward. And Donald Trump has, he has a very unique personality. Matter of fact, a lot of people, they are angry in the US right now.
Sushant Sareen, I'd like to also bring you in on this broadcast. Look, Professor Latham says there's no conspiracy involved, but looking at the details that have emerged of the New Orleans attacker, the suspect there and the suspect in Las Vegas, there are eerie similarities. Do you think they're linked? Because we're talking about an army veteran being involved in the incident in New Orleans. Details trickling in right now of the suspect also in Las Vegas, who also seems to be an army veteran.
Look, if there is a conspiracy in which these two gentlemen and whatever networks they're belonging to were actually conspiring to launch these attacks, I think we'll find that out. As of now, there is no clear evidence. There are, of course, coincidences that it's the same company from where the vehicles have been hired and stuff like that. But yes, individually, each one is a conspiracy in a manner of speaking. If you look at the New Orleans attack, and look, incidentally, all acts of terrorism are political, they're ideological, and in some cases, they're religious. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. There is no act of terrorism which is not a political act. But as far as the New Orleans attack is concerned, it seems that the motivation of that is, at least on the face of it, very different from the one which took place in Las Vegas. Now, given the kind of political polarization which is there in the US, the symbolism of an attack outside the Trump Tower in a vehicle which is manufactured by Elon Musk, one of the biggest backers of the incoming president, it seems like this is a politically motivated attack, also because they seem to have found some ordnance and some explosives which are different from what was initially reported, which is that these were firecrackers and stuff like that. The only thing which I'm interested in knowing is that since the driver died, was this a kind of a suicide attack? Then probably one of the first ones to have taken place in the United States. Or was this a guy who wanted to get out and then probably explode that cybertruck from a distance? That is one. The other one, of course, is an ISIS-inspired one. Yeah. But I don't think, perhaps, who knows, politics in America is quite crazy these days. So maybe the ISIS guys and the guys who hate Donald Trump are probably on the same side. Who can tell anymore? Considering that in Ivy League universities, people support groups like Hamas and other terror groups. So you can't say whether that is indeed the case. But look, in one case, it's an ISIS. In the other case, it's probably some kind of a left-wing nut group which has decided to, make some kind of a symbolic attack to make a point. But like Elon Musk says, the Cybertruck is built like a tank, and thankfully it didn't do any damage, except for the driver himself, who probably died in the attack.
Professor Asal, do you think so too? Do you think that particularly the Las Vegas incident was some sort of a warning being issued to Elon Musk and Donald Trump, or at least their style of politics?
So I want to take a step back, if that would be okay with you. Yeah. And I want to note that extremism in America over the last several years has gotten much worse. And I'm going to disagree with my colleagues here that the extremism that we're seeing here is not just coming from one side. So there's been a growth in Islamist extremism, but there's also been a growth in right-wing extremism. So if you remember the January 6th attacks in 2021, you know what I'm talking about, yes?
Of course.
And so I think, and I'm somebody who studies extremist non-state actor violence, and I've studied it cross-nationally, but I've also studied it within the context of the United States. And there has been a growth of extremist organizations in this country, and they're coming from different ideologies. A lot of them are from the right, and some of them are Islamist, some are left, but it's not just from one direction.
In that case, Professor Asal, since you're saying, it's coming from every direction, obviously that makes it a lot more challenging to also tackle. But do you believe that under a certain regime, there's one type of extremism that's perhaps thrived more than the other?
So I think that depending upon the direction of the government, it is very likely that the people who see the government as the bad guys are likely to go more extremist than the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I will note that in the United States, that would be related to left and right, but Islamist extremism, like this gentleman was claiming in his statement, in his video, in some of the videos that they found, I think that's a completely different direction. I don't think that is related to Democrat or Republican. I think that's related to hating America in general.
Okay.
And this is somebody who converted to Islam, and unfortunately, not the conversion to Islam, that's fine, but he embraced radical Islamist hatred, and that's the problem.
Absolutely. Tara Karta, can I bring you in as a terrorism and security expert? Look, there are going to be questions about why we're seeing this rise in attacks on American soil. Shootings is one thing, because there's all this talk of gun reform. But with Donald Trump referring to this once again, as a scourge of illegals entering into America, do you really see that as the problem here?
No, I mean, I've kind of looked at counterterrorism for about nearly 2 decades. One, I don't believe in coincidences. If there is usually a pattern in this, in counterterrorism, you don't ever believe in coincidences. To both are Afghan war veterans. Both were apparently, possibly posted to Afghanistan more or less at the same time. On one level, you could say this justifies what Trump is saying, that end all wars. These are troubled people who came back. And one is a guy who had running a charity. He was collecting toys and things for the children of Afghanistan. That is who he was. And from there to here, that's quite a journey. So in one way, you can say, yeah, this whole, the special forces people, they take the biggest brunt of psychological violence. So that is a possible factor. But in the end, what I want to really see is that the end result of these attacks is going to be that Tulsi Gabbard's view of ending the surveillance state, ending intrusiveness is done. She's not going to be able to do that. So I'm not saying this is some huge conspiracy or something. I'm just saying that reform, which she is so passionate about, because she defended, as you know, Julius Assange, all the rest of them. So that is not going to happen anymore. So there is there's otherwise this doesn't make sense at all. I mean, putting an ISIS flag, ISIS attacks are very different. I mean, if I were to look at a planned ISK attack, I would look at the Moscow attack. 137 people killed, massive. Single lone wolf attacks, yes. But in the other one, there is no ISK I'm talking about ISK in Afghanistan. It's really not that big a deal. And there are about
do you think it's a front to divert perhaps from the intention, from the motive?
Yeah, there's something iffy about this. I don't want to sort of commit myself here because, like we said, we don't know the facts yet.
Yeah.
But there are about 4 factions of ISIS-K in Afghanistan controlled by different entities. They could still be inspired by the propaganda, because the last issue of Voice of Khorasan clearly talks about US, it talks about Russia, both as enemies of ISK. So it is there. Whether they got so fired up, but as I think the previous speaker said, both were very, very troubled individuals. So this whole Islamic State thing seems a little iffy.
Professor Latham, you said, in your opening comments that you don't believe there's any sort of conspiracy. You just had Tara list out a couple of similarities that make it very difficult to believe that this was really a coincidence at this point.
Well, politics is full of coincidences. And what I meant to say...
And coincidences, sure.
I don't think I was clear enough, is that there weren't people whispering and conspiring behind the scenes to conduct these 2 operations. But there was an underlying discontent which spontaneously manifested weirdly at the same time. That's not a conspiracy. These were, I don't know about the Tesla perpetrator, but Jabbar, was clearly a very troubled individual who channeled his rage and anger in a very particular narratively constructed way, which was Islamism, if I can put it just bluntly. That's different, though, than there was making the claim that there was some kind of conspiracy in which people behind closed doors and smoke-filled rooms, metaphorically, obviously we don't do that anymore, were conspiring to make this happen. That's not what's going on here. It's more troubling what's going on here, which is that there's some fundamental disaffections which are manifesting through troubled individuals as a political project involving killing many, many people. I don't think it's got anything to do with Trump. I'm not a fan of his, but I don't think it's got anything to do with him. I think this is a deeper malaise in Western culture, which is manifesting itself in all kinds of really ugly, horrible, and lethal ways.
So, Shant, do you think so too, that, this is essentially the rot in society that's now getting exposed in the form of these kind of attacks, which unfortunately America isn't new to?
Yeah, of course, there are societal problems. I don't think anybody can deny that there are societal problems. And on top of that, you've had a level of political polarization which has never been witnessed in the past. So yes, I think the professor from New York, he's correct. But we are talking about these two particular instances. So obviously, it's unlikely, at least on the face of it, prima facie, that these were carried out by any right-wing group. One seems to be clearly an Islamist. The other, at least the symbolism behind the attack, seems to be some kind of a left-wing nut. That does not mean that there are no right-wing nuts in America who are carrying out terror attacks or who are forming militias and spouting hate. That's also happening in the US. But it's not just in the US that this kind of stuff is happening. You can see manifestations of these tendencies in other countries as well. Partly you could say it's a kind of a reaction. Partly you could say it's a kind of a societal breakdown of sorts. You could say it's the intersectionality of economic problems with social problems, with political polarization. Yeah, it's a complex phenomena and it hasn't been addressed adequately. Even on the issue of the Islamic radicalism and terrorism which is taking place, it hasn't been addressed adequately. It's more addressed more out of apologism rather than or in a mad kinetic way rather than in the way it needs to be addressed. So yes, you make tons of money by having CVE programs and with very little to show for it, especially in the affected countries and affected groups. But that is the way things are going. So clearly, you really need to rethink how to combat terrorism and terrorism of all hues. It's not just right-wing terrorism is fine and left-wing is not okay. All hues. In India, for example, we've had left-wing extremism for the longest, and we've tried to fight it ideologically, economically. We've tried to fight it politically. Something similar needs to be done with other forms of terrorism as well in other countries. So there's something that we can learn from them, and there's a lot maybe we can even teach them.
Professor Asal, do you think that President-elect Trump, when he comes in less than 20 days from now, is someone who will actually deal with all aspects of terror, not look at it from a prism of which side, but actually deal with all sides of it that you referred to?
I think President Trump has a perspective on who the bad guys are. And because of that, I think he's going to primarily focus on, and I wouldn't say just terrorism, I'd say extremism. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, all forms.
And I would say focus on extremism, Islamist extremism, left-wing extremism. I don't think he's going to pay as much attention to right-wing extremism as he probably should. Okay, and this gets back to the January 6th event. But I also think it's very important that we all realize that there's still a lot of information that we don't actually know about these two events.
Sure.
And until we get more information, so I have read that these two individuals served together in the military.
Correct.
And so is it possible that they conspired to do this together? Yes. Do we know that? And so the issue of what the level of conspiracy is and was this connected to an organization, these are still two very open questions. And I'm leaning towards thinking this was just an individual act.
Yep.
On both parts, but we don't know that for sure yet. And I think it's important for us to realize that clearly.
The unfortunate reality is we've seen lone wolf strikes, we've seen mass shootings taking place in America. But like you pointed out, Professor Asal, there are similarities here. They use the same car rental app, the Turo app. They both were Afghan war veterans. They've both served in the army. So there are a lot of similarities. But obviously, we leave that to the agencies to really dive deep and get us those details. Final closing comments, Professor Latham, with less than 20 days to go now for Trump's inauguration, does this really change things? Does this mean more challenging times for Trump?
I don't think it changes anything fundamentally. I just want to echo the sentiments that were expressed a little bit earlier about we just don't know yet what exactly has happened. So we have to wait for the investigating agencies to sort that out. Mm-hmm. But my sense is that these two events will be, if I can minimize them, they'll be a blip on the road to his inauguration. And I do want to echo also the sentiment of one of my friends who just said this, which is that there's going to be more of an emphasis on Islamist and left-wing extremism than right-wing extremism in this incoming administration. That shouldn't be the case. It's troubling that it will be the case, and maybe it won't be the case. Extremism, in whatever flavor, whatever brand, is always a bad thing.
Absolutely. Just as there's no such thing as good or bad terrorism, there's no such thing as left or right. There's extremism, there's terrorism, and we need to define it like that. Hopefully our politicians will as well. Thank you very much for joining us here on this discussion. Yes, Professor Asal, you have one point to make.
I would say when you're doing research and you're trying to fight these things, you do need to pay attention to ideologies, but you need to fight all the terrorisms and focus on all of them. But ideology is an important component to pay attention to.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Asal. We'll leave it on that note. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Professor Latham, Sushant Sareen, as well as Tara Karta for joining us here tonight on News Today.